racing each other in a spot that we didn't like at all. And that meant most of you turned off the full race and watched the KO mini highlights if that was an option for you race directors, TV directors. If you're a director this weekend, very clear you have no idea what you're doing. But I tell you what, it at least was a bit spicy towards the end. And of course, we have to thank the absolute god of Formula One for such entertainment. G'day, I'm James. Welcome to the Australian opinion on Formula One here at the Lakeside Drive F1 podcast. In this episode, we review the Brazilian Grand Prix. And I'm joined by my friend and yours, Freya. Hello, mate.
Hello, mate. I've nearly recovered from the snooze fest that was Sunday after the restart, but we'll find something to talk about.
I don't understand. Look, I actually really enjoyed this race. If you ignore Max Verstappen, which often I tend to do after turn one, you ignore Lando Norris's performance, which was very well done. The tactics that were going on towards the middle and the back were interesting, and it also was let's play a game of who can not be hot. Because if you are hot, then you're out.
I half expected Alonso to say, my seat is really hot all of a sudden. Everyone else is having cooling issues.
Yeah, but a little bit of a bore fest. The sprint race weekend side of things wasn't all that entertaining, to be perfectly honest. But the good news is Sao Paulo has been extended for many, many years and hopefully will be forever. It is such a brilliant race circuit and always delivers. As Martin Brundle says, he's not sure where it comes from, but the most ominous storm in television history appeared at the end of qualifying, which was shocking for everyone except for Lance Stroll, who was able to say to people, hey, look, I qualified in third. Yeah, but not on your own pace, buddy. All right, let's just jump straight into... Look, I'm going to take us to Tommy T's television broadcast review. First, because I have too many things on my mind, Freya, that I want to get away from first. Anthem. So, not sure if you saw this.
I didn't,
okay.
Unfortunately.
Let me paint a picture for you. A beautiful Brazilian instrument between a guitar and a ukulele. I forget the name off the top of my head, so please excuse my ignorance. Beautifully played by who I assume was the younger brother of the singer. Anyway, started singing. That was fine. It was very slow-moving pace. We know how I felt about the American national anthem. Needed to pick itself up a little bit. And at one point, either she stopped singing or the microphone stopped working because all of the gathered officials standing next to Stefano Domenicali all started trying to look around the cameraman, which was very interesting because she had stopped singing. But the guitar/ukulele playing continued. It was an interesting anthem, but lots of passion. I loved being able to watch the marshals who were holding the Brazilian flag behind the two performers sing along as well. I haven't seen a lot of that this year. But of course, Brazil is a brilliant place to come. The TV director has many, many, many options to choose good views. And he did not. He or she did not. There was an absolutely terrible weekend of TV direction from my view, Freya.
It very much peaked before the race where they were showing the lakes around it and explaining the name for Interlagos being between these two kind of bodies of water. That was at the absolute peak of the race direction this weekend, and everybody learned something. I think Gunther even said, thanks, you've just taught me a bit more about Brazil. That's fantastic. And it kind of went downhill from there, to be honest. I did miss the anthem, but that's problematic and a shame for the singer. I'm sure that will be something that they will be somewhat, upset about. And then for the rest of it, just, oh my gosh, we can go through the moments, but the one which got me really at the end was actually Alonso getting out of the car and the cameras on Norris. And I was like, Alonso has just been performing like an absolute god and he's finally out of his car. And I know what that chanting sounds like. I saw it in Montreal last year, where everybody is just chanting his name. And you've got the camera somewhere else. I was very upset about that.
Someone needs to tell the television director that we don't need to see Max Verstappen crossing the finish line when he's that. If there is a 30-second gap, who cares? All right, cut to it maybe at just the last second. We don't need to see the entire run-up of that and then the entire run-up of Lando Norris, again, up to the checkered flag, when you have such an awesome battle going on. Having a sprint as well with Daniel, it is just...
Yeah.
I don't understand. This is your job. How can you be so shit at it when there are so many people out there who probably really want it? Genuine question. It's same with the race director, and I'm going to bring this up again later. When we haven't spoken about it nearly as much, we heaped on Michael Massey back in the day when he made silly decisions, but we still respected him because at least he made decisions. Now they are it is ridiculous. Anyway, we also didn't have Bernie this weekend, Freya, which is, again, an immediate mark down for the Sky broadcast. Can I get your score out of 10 for the great man's television broadcast review, the great man being Voldemort?
Well, I think he was actually at the track qualifying. If you just saw those skies, it did look like the dark mark was about to appear. So we haven't spoken to Tommy T in months. So if he's somewhere, I've got an idea now.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, no Bernie, that's demerit points right there. The end of the race I was disappointed with, given what was still happening, and even when Alonso got out of the car, I just wanted to see that man's face. I have to say I didn't see the anthem, but overall, I did like the lakes. I love a body of water. So
a flyover too.
I'm going to say a 5.5 out of 10.
Yeah, okay. I will agree. There was an upside-down PC-21 flight. It's the same aircraft type as what the roulettes fly. It was absolutely nothing to do with the anthem, though, I feel. Or if it was about 15 years too late for that. So 5.5, I think, is a fair comment, Freya. Fair enough.
And now it's time for the Discord comment of the week.
All right, let's go to our Discord comment of the week. And my Discord comment of the week this week comes from Anna. And this is just spitting hot, real fire and absolute truth. Because what she said is, I'd rather see angry and frustrated Daniel than depressed Daniel. And I think that's Anna, thank you for that. And thank you for everyone for being part of the Discord this weekend. It was absolutely off chops for a lot of it. It is just so much fun to be able to see and to follow along with. But Freya, I feel that deep in my soul because
big time.
Him complaining about the DRS, the second DRS zone, and actually getting on the radio and just venting about it, I was like, okay, he wants this. There is no shadow of a doubt anymore about his willingness to be here.
Oh, absolutely. We'd take an angry, frustrated Daniel over a sad and depressed and hopeless feeling Daniel any day. So, Anna, you are absolutely spot on with that comment. And he's obviously got a fire. I think that's just... we'll talk obviously about him and his performance this weekend, but it's just that difference between feeling like there is the potential and not feeling like there is any future. That is the difference between having hope for what you can do and going, what's the point? They are the two mindsets, and we're seeing somebody who knows that they can actually reel in some points for the team and help them out and get some good racing done in comparison to somebody who is feeling probably quite disempowered.
Yeah, Alpha Tauri looked very strong this weekend in comparison to the beginning of the year. We will get to them. You're absolutely right. Let's now look at how hopeless we were with our predictions.
Do I get a Discord comment of the week?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Absolutely you do. Sorry, I thought you would agree with me with Anna. No, Anna, you're in the bin for Freya. Put yourself in the bin immediately.
Anna is not in the bin. That's not what I said. She's also the one who cooks delicious food every weekend,
I know.
The theme of the race. So there was some incredible dishes coming up this weekend as well. So my Discord comment of the week actually goes, as voted by our Discord members, to a guy in the bar that I was watching in, where I think it was like during the red flag. I don't know. It all kind of went quiet for a second, and it was quite loud in there, and it kind of went quiet for a second, and the commentary was, not talking about anything in particular, tyres, tyre management, what's the weather like, isn't that mad, blah, blah, blah. And someone just out of the blue behind me just goes, fuck you, Lando Norris. It's like, we're not... We're not talking about him. He is not on screen.
Yep.
Nobody is talking about him. And that thought just came to your mind and you just let it right out. And there was something about the completely, zero prompt, out of the blue. That's what was on your mind. And that it just made me laugh. But because I do feel like I need to give a shout out to our Discord members. James, tell me what you can see on this screen.
Oh, well, I mean, that's almost going to be the single winning thing for Freya Brolsma, anything to do with the Golden Retriever. But the Golden Retriever sitting, begging almost, looking up at probably what I can only imagine is a food source of some description because they're so food-driven. I doubt it's a ball. With a red flag in the background. That is your photo of the year.
That's my photo of the year. So Ben M has posted this photo of his Golden Retriever called Harry, who is demanding that he is paid attention to him and not to the TV. And the way he is so proudly displaying his furry little chest and his gorgeous little paws. Harry, you might have just won the internet for me because Golden Retriever Formula One crossovers is my jam.
Maybe in the Discord cats and dogs section, Freya, you can post a picture of a recent addition to your family back home.
I can do that. Matilda would be delighted.
Thanks, Harry. Thank you for being the sweetest boy as part of our Discord for this weekend. All right, let us now move on to the predictions and what we got right, what we got wrong. Let's start with Campy's. Campy's front row was Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. Now, to be fair to both him and me, because I had the same, this is the only track that Mercedes had form on last year, and with a terrible designed car. We probably thought, hey, maybe the car is now better designed, it would be better. Incorrect. He had for his podium Verstappen, Hamilton and Piastri. That's no good for Oscar. And 10th Gasly because he wanted him to crash, but Gasly actually got decent haul of points.
Yeah.
But that's because everyone else retired. Freya, you had Verstappen. You had... What have I done here? You had Sainz. You didn't have anyone else for your front row. You just said Sainz. So Carlos Sainz Senior, Carlos Sainz Junior lining up. The podium, Hamilton, Verstappen, Norris, and 10th, Albon. Norris
Albon.
and Verstappen, good. Interesting again
It's
for
2
Hamilton.
out of 3.
I had Verstappen and Hamilton. I also had Verstappen, Hamilton, and Sainz, and Joe in 10th. And so the curse for 10th for me was active this week. Basically, have a Ferrari power unit, have an issue, unless you're Carlos Sainz.
That's 2 out of 3 of our 10th predictions who DNF'd. This is no good.
This is why we're not allowed in the paddock.
No.
Stop talking about it. This
There's
is ridiculous.
the Rosberg curse, and then there's the Lakeside Drive curse. Everybody knows about it. Yep.
Well,
yep.
as a term that Michael Laminato and I coined on the Extreme E podcast, the podcaster's pox is what we came up with, which is true for 10th position. Okay, Freya, let's jump into a bit of a team-by-team analysis. We're going to focus on the race and the actual qualifying because nothing all that interesting really happened in sprint, apart from Daniel being very frustrated about missing out on a championship point, which was his only opportunity really this weekend to get that, thanks to two HAASes and a Williams. Let's start, though, at the very back of the pack. Unfortunately for this weekend, Alfa Romeo, Sauber, Bottas qualified 18th, Joe qualified 20th. They both did not finish. Bottas had some really good race pace at one point. Joe had the most soft tyres saved for his last stint, which wasn't to be, Freya. It's interesting. We're getting to the end of the season, so it is very difficult to start to talk about new things with teams that we are pretty certain are focused totally on next year now. But it is neither here nor there. The interesting thing about this team is that they've not scored a single point in a sprint weekend this year. It's the only team to have not scored in a sprint race weekend.
I mean, I don't know how much there is to say. Like you said, at this point of the season, we've only got 2 races left. I honestly think that these two are just not going through the motions necessarily, but they are waiting for this season to be over. So
Yes.
they can have a little break and come back fresh, because they don't seem to be able to get any luck. We had one weekend where, they showed some great pace and were in the points, fantastic. And there were moments this weekend, and I think Bottas actually said, this is really disappointing because we felt like we actually had great pace here. So to have the issues that we did, 2 DNFs, there's just something I think just desperately heartbreaking about a double DNF. Like having one person in a team that you support not finishing for a technical issue feels really unlucky and disappointing, but it's kind of part of the sport. But when you have a double DNF and it's on a team who have, been having a tough time, it's just, what do you say? It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. What I would say, though, is a bit of joy in amongst all of this darkness is a couple of things that proud Australian Valtteri Bottas is doing. If you don't follow Shia Rejdev on Instagram, by the way, who is the Alfa Romeo social and digital person, please go and do that because he's got a great photo of VB and DR together, the two Australians, the two chaotic Australians. Firstly, a shout out to Oliver Stranger and Hannah. I have not yet had an opportunity to taste the wine because my foot is in a cast, but I will be doing a bit of a wine opening review, and then Freya, Campy and myself will share the other bottle in January. It's only a couple of months away whilst Freya is here, so we'll do a little bit of an episode there. Maybe we'll even go across to McLaren Vale. We'll just jump into the ute and drive across and do it there. So there's that. Valtteri's also doing a gravel event in McLaren Vale, in Radelaide, the Radelaide Gravel, which I think is fantastic.
Now.
Yeah.
Gravelade?
So just to talk about something that's different, but it's also a bit joyous for Valtteri Bottas. Go and check that out if you don't follow him on social media. Also, he's doing Movember, so the Dirty Mo will get to full capacity probably by the time Abu Dhabi comes around. How Tiffany feels about that, we will find out at that point. Also, if you've not listened to my chat with Tiffany Cromwell yet, she is an absolute legend. You can click up here. I'll put a banner on if you're watching on YouTube, or go back and find my chat with her in the podcast feed. Let's talk about HAAS because Kevin Magnussen really squeezed Nico Hülkenberg, who then squeezed Alex Albon, who then hit Magnussen, who then had a tyre into the back of Daniel and Oscar. So had some anti-Australian activity going on the track by a number of drivers here, which was absolutely no good. But qualifying 11th for Hülkenberg, 14th for Magnussen. Hulk ended up finishing 12th. I'm pretty sure there was only 14 finishes, though, where did Piastri finish? 14th. There's only 14 finishes for the entire Grand Prix, so not exactly an amazing stat for them. This is a team, yet again, that I was expecting Hülkenberg to suffer cooling issues too, Freya, considering how Ferrari they are.
Well, that's it. I think there's no secret as to two of their biggest challenges when it comes to this team, one being tyre degradation and the other being the cooling issues that they seem to have. Not just here, they've had other races where that's affected them as well. So like you, I thought we might see them qualify fairly well, but then they were likely to have issues here for the race for those two reasons in particular. But just a start that went off to no good and didn't really get any better for them. So disappointing because I think we said it last time on the podcast is, of course, where we had that momentous K-Mag moment in qualifying last year, which shocked everybody. So it was a shame not to see them higher up. Some other things that came out this week was that HAAS are petitioning to review the US Grand Prix results, and they have a hearing which has actually been set for tomorrow. So, Wednesday. So today, time isn't real. And it basically comes down to how track limits were applied and policed in the Austin Grand Prix. So that would affect potentially Albon, Checo and Stroll because they basically said, there were 2 or 3 corners where it would appear as though they exceeded track limits and they weren't penalised for it. So and that being enough, more than obviously needing more than one in a race to then get penalised for it, to have affected the positioning overall. So we'll see what comes from that. In order for it to really get any traction, they've got to have something that the stewards didn't have on the day. Yeah. So obviously, if they're looking at this, the stewards are going to look at the camera angles that they have and obviously decide. And let's be clear, they're not shy at handing out track limits warnings. No. It's something that they're quite willing to do, as we've seen in particular over the last 4 or 5 races. Yeah. So it's interesting because it suggests that HAAS either has something, whether it's some evidence or footage or something, or it could be them just making a point to say, we have a problem with this and we're going to let you know about it.
Can I just say, when you started talking about it, Campy, out of nowhere in the back of my mind, came up to me and went, "Snoochers get snoochers." That's the first. I was like, if Cam is going to say anything about the situation, that is what he would say.
I reckon he'd be like, "Oh, grow up, like, move on."
Sorry, listeners, you were having an audio feast up until that point. What I think is interesting, though, is HAAS are now last in the Constructors' Championship on 12 championship points, Alfa Romeo on 16, Alpha Tauri on 21, Williams on 28. So this is a battle for 7th now between Alpha Tauri and Williams, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But this is tactics now that are completely dire because they can't do any talking on track. I think, and we sort of said this a couple of episodes ago, I'm pretty sure, HAAS need to grow up at one point or another and stop making cars inside Ferrari and invest in designing your own cars. The fact that Andretti is building a whole plant dedicated to that, and you're not, and they're not even in Formula One yet, speaks volumes to me. I understand that takes lots of money and time and commitment and everything else, but there is no way on earth HAAS will ever do anything well until they are out from underneath that banner of Ferrari, because it's just not going well. You have had a very long time at figuring that out. Brand new regulations. In the first 6 rounds, you have a great opportunity to score points. We saw that in this era and the last era, so long as you can put tyres on properly, which you didn't at that point. But it just, to me, because there's a lot of potential here. And I think, Freya, from you, I'm interested from your point of view at the US Grand Prix, this is the American team, but it didn't feel like there was all that much support for them still.
No, not necessarily. I mean, they loved the livery. The livery looked great, and they had their special race suits. But, you know, the loudest cheer, hands down, were 2 people, Daniel Ricciardo and Checo.
Yep.
They were the 2 people who got the biggest cheers, no competition at all. You know, the American team, even their American driver of Logan Sargeant, nowhere near the support. And we've talked about that before, just in terms of the charisma and then obviously, you know, just the support that Checo has in that part of the world, generally speaking. And you can't compete with that. And I think it shows that they haven't quite learned what it takes to tap into potentially, you know, their own backyard.
Let's talk about Williams now. I'm laughing because I'm reading your note next to Albon. Sargeant qualified 19th and finished in 11th.
Forgot what I wrote.
and Alex Albon qualified at 15th, had one of the best starts on the grid, and then to read it verbatim, then boo, which I agree, because he had a mega start. Would have been a great around the outside manoeuvre. Williams had a little bit of pace this weekend when they could work out the tyres. It's interesting, this team hasn't gone as far forward in its development as I think we probably were all expecting it to do. Logan Sargeant fantastically finished 11th. I saw a video of James Vowles talking to the team about trying to rally the troops around getting to 7th. And he said at the end of this season, he wants to come away with 7th, which for Williams would be absolutely outstanding.
Huge.
But it does require both drivers to A, finish, and B, score points. We're going to Vegas, which we've never been to before as a Grand Prix circuit, so who knows what that's going to be like. And then, of course, we go to Abu Dhabi. They're in this battle for 7th with Alpha Tauri, who now, at least for this weekend, see both of their drivers scoring points. So I don't think it's going to happen for Williams. We'll talk about Alpha Tauri a little bit more about maybe points left on the table. But for Logan Sargeant to be stood next to James Vowles, talking about, you know, we're in this together, we need to score as many points, everything else. From your point of view, how hard is that for Logan? Because obviously he's a human being. He's trying his absolute best. Unfortunately, it would seem that the car and him just not gelling to figure it out. We've seen it before. Checo, Daniel in a McLaren. It does happen. The last person to properly gel was Nick Latifi with this Williams, of course. And we welcome his return to the sport at any juncture. But just in that video, which I'm not sure you saw, just how James gathers his troops around more generally, though, I think it's probably one of the best leadership styles that I've seen in Formula One in recent times.
And when you pair him with someone like Albon, who is now a leader as a driver as well, as much as I don't think people initially saw him as that when he came back and made his return to Williams after doing all that support work with Red Bull, it is very evident that that's exactly what he is. So I think when you go with James Vowles and then Alex Albon, you've got a very neat pairing to have somebody else who just needs to be sitting with Albon scoring some points wherever that is possible. So, those two, I think we're working exceptionally well together. Just hearing how other people speak of both of them gives you a lot of confidence in their ability to get the team in the best place possible, whatever that is, for their team, and absolutely extracting the most potential, not just out of the car, but everybody who's working for that organisation.
Yeah.
For Sargeant, I think it can only be difficult because I think like you said, he is human. And I think the struggle with all of this is the shame that he might feel as a result. And that is just one of the most extraordinarily painful emotions that can link to all sorts of other, troubling experiences. And the problem, I think, for him that has been so frustrating for us to see is that the weekends that he has had some potential, he's then had some bad luck that has come with it. I definitely think he's improved though. Like I know when you look at his results on paper, it doesn't look good. And has he had enough to show that he deserves to be in Formula One? Probably not. But two things. One, I don't think they have a better option at this stage. I think they are better off just continuing on what they've built to this point. But the other thing is that he has improved. I think that's hard to argue with. When you look at him at the start of the year to where he is at now, there have been big steps in improvement. And then if they can continue to, nurture the entire team in the way that they have this year, hopefully that just continues. All I can say is that the team where it is at the moment, he's in the best place possible to try and get those, to try and get that best out of himself from what we see, certainly in terms of both his teammate as well as their leader. You mentioned social media before and Valtteri Bottas. Alex Albon has to be my next favourite on social media. He just has such a way. He's got a bit of a kind of, doesn't take himself too seriously. Very different personality, of course, to somebody like Valtteri. He also has that very obviously kind of fun, slightly rogue sense of humour about him. But with Alex and with his girlfriend Lily, who's obviously an exceptional athlete in her own right, they've got sponsorships like things like CeraVe, and they'll post the ad, but then they'll post the videos of them trying to make the ad with his like foot on the wall behind him, trying to turn the light on and off while they're just no, they're not pretentious. They just seem like good fun.
Real
and
people.
It doesn't take himself too seriously. So that's another person who I would suggest getting around as far as social media goes.
Also, just to dwell on Alex Albon for a little bit longer, at the Goodwood Festival of Speed earlier this year, and I was there kind of with McLaren and Emma Gilmore and hanging out with Oscar on the Sunday. Seb Vettel was there, Oscar was there, Mick Schumacher was there, but also Alex Albon was there. No one had said anything that he was going to be there. He turned up and was just the nicest person in the paddock. He was pausing for photos. There was no security around him. With Seb, there was like 6 security guards around him all the time and everything else. But he was just so genuine. He was talking to the historical mechanics with all the Williams cars that he ended up driving, and just his aura. I kind of almost hate myself for using that word, but it was just authentic. What you see is what you get with him. There's no putting anything else. Same with Oscar, actually. So I imagine he's just a great bloke.
Isn't it interesting to see when you see that type of behaviour? It doesn't make you take him any less seriously as a driver at all, or suggest that he's going to be any less competitive than anybody else. So I find it really interesting. It's one of the biggest myths, I think, around sport, generally speaking, is that whole, you've got to be a bit of an asshole to be successful. No, you fucking don't. You're going to have your moments, sure, but you can be a kind, supportive, good leader, all of those things, and you don't have to be a dickhead about it. And I just think he's a really good example of somebody who's obviously top 20 in the world at this sport, and shows that really, genuine, lovely personality. And it's just, it's nice to see.
Let's talk about Alpine and how Esteban Ocon is incorrect most of the time. He said, remember that time when he lost the car in qualifying and smashed into Alonso?
God.
He comes out saying that I lost the car. That's not true. Brake, we spoke about just before we started recording, or Blake Hinsey, who ex-former Rebel mechanic on Twitter, was like, can someone get me the number of Esteban's dealer? Because whatever he is on is outstanding. Yes, agreed. Esteban, dude, just like own up to your mistakes. I know Gasly's starting to pants you and you're starting to worry about your future. The honest truth is, mate, you're not going anywhere else in Formula One. This is your last seat. Stuff like that is just ridiculous. When you're very obviously losing the car, don't come out and say that you didn't lose the car.
Did you not notice the 150 cameras that are dotted around this track where we have onboards, we've got the wing mirror, we've got all of these different footage angles, and it is so clear that he has lost that car before he hits Alonso.
Yeah.
And so I think someone could say, okay, well, Alonso could have given him a bit more space. Didn't have to. He had plenty of room. Plenty of room. He was not in control of that car.
Ridiculous. That's it. I don't care about him anymore. Gasly, though, the best driver in Formula One ever.
Oh, he's exceptional, isn't he? French are brilliant.
Qualified 13th, finished 7th. He benefited from the numerous amounts of retirements that occurred, was able to put some good pressure on George Russell, though, before he retired too. This car is nowhere. We keep talking about it. They still don't have a team principal. But I think Gasly's starting to get into the rhythm now, Freya, with this team. It obviously takes a little while. He's come from the world of Red Bull and Alfa Tauri and Toro Rosso. So there is a little bit of sort of re-education, I suppose, and especially going from a UK-based or an Italian-based team to a UK-based team, now to a French and UK-based team. So in my mind, he is the one that's sort of stepping up for this team, and I think the team will start to build the car around his preference of driving style. Whilst it seems on paper that they've been very easily matched, or evenly matched rather, Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, it's hard to argue that, you know, from a press point of view, from a commercial point of view, Gasly seems to have a lot more weight behind him. He doesn't say stupid things. He does own up to his mistakes if he makes them. And of course, this is a car that desperately needs some help. It's not going to get it. So 2026, they need someone who's going to be stable in that seat to help them to get to that point.
Yeah, I think these two is actually one of the most interesting driver pairings in terms of seeing what's going to happen next. There's others which are very kind of much stabilizing, and we can see what they're going to look like in the next year or two. Mercedes, that's not going to change. Your Ferrari's not going to change, this, that, and the other. You look at this one, I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because they are fairly evenly matched. You don't have one who is absolutely pantsing the other. You know, it's not a dramatic difference in their performance so far. Both French, just the whole thing I actually find quite fascinating as a dynamic, and how they choose to manage it for the next year or so and how that plays out. I think you're probably right. I do think that, you know, Ocon has had his opportunities, I suppose, with this car now, and he hasn't done terribly. He's a really solid set of hands most of the time, obviously qualifying accepted. But, you know, for somebody to come straight into the team and kind of equal your performances, it's probably not a great look for you. And it's also that question of how much could somebody else be getting out of this car in comparison to your own performance. Going to Gasly just for a minute, and I do agree that he's probably going to come out on top when it comes to those two. This weekend, they said that they absolutely prioritised race pace over their qualifying setup, so he knew he probably wasn't going to qualify that well, but they had a much better chance of having a good race than they did having an exceptional qualifying. So if you know you're not going to qualify in your top five, well, then you're better off having a car that's going to race well. And you have to trust that in order to be able to do some overtakes. So they wanted to be better on the straights. They'd made those adjustments in terms of their setup. And at the end of the day, they executed their strategy well. They managed their tyres well. I think he had a great overtake. Must have been on Hamilton, and then was kind of hanging on to the back of Sainz, I want to say. Trying to think about what order I've already finished in. But, you know, he had some on-track overtakes as well. So as much as he did benefit from, some of the unique conditions of this race, he also overtook people on track, which was important, because I think sometimes it's very easy to say, oh, well, you know, you just got undercut or this, that, and the other. This was a combination of things working really well for him. So very mixed reviews from them as a team. Gasly having a pretty great weekend. Ocon, not so much.
Look, they both finished the points. They are sixth in the Constructors' Championship. They have no danger of getting fifth, and they're in no danger of being caught up by Williams and AlphaTauri in that seventh position. So that's where they will sit for the rest of this year. Let's talk about AlphaTauri. Danny Rick qualified 17th. He just didn't have the pace in the second run. Finished 13th in the race. He finished 9th in the sprint race, just outside the points. Sonoda qualified 16th, so out-qualifying Danny Rick, and then finished 9th. He also stuffed it going into one of the corners and dropped a couple of places, so potentially some issues that he was managing, but also just maybe some patience still he needs to learn. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, Freya, is that he said of Daniel this week, one of the things I want to learn from Daniel is how he manages stress and, that how to manage one's own anger, for want of a better word, and frustration when you get into a high-stress situation, which I think is really good because Daniel is very good at doing that. Yuki Tsunoda is a fast driver. He is a very fast driver. It's just about putting it all together consistently. We know Michael Italiano has been working on that with him from a mental and physical mindset, but it's also, you can only help a guy so much when he's in the car on a racetrack. AlphaTauri, though, this is a bit of potentially it's obviously not a great weekend for them. They had pace. There was showing. Why on earth the race director doesn't just throw a red flag to begin with when you can see all of the shit on the track? We need to have a yellow flag, bring all the cars, and suddenly they're a lap down. Obviously, we are aggrieved as Australians because both Australians are affected by this.
Yeah.
But it is just not difficult, mate. Just throw a red flag. Like, how much information do you need before you can see there is so much debris on the track, nicked debris on the track, for you to have to stop the Grand Prix? Now, Campy doesn't like red flags, but in this instance, I will speak on behalf of all of us, we wanted the red flag because to be a lap down immediately, what is the point of even going Grand Prix racing at that point? There is no point for the fans. There's no point for them. They've already started from the pit lanes. They bring them back up. I think it's a stupid rule. Yes, I'm aggrieved as an Australian, and you'll just have to deal with it because they both drove a great race. The mechanics, both for McLaren and for AlphaTauri, worked incredibly hard to put those cars back on the track. Then Oscar Piastri was carrying damage for the rest of his time out around Interlagos again. A Grand Prix circuit that he's never raced at before and showed a bit of pace. So, anyway, rant over. Race director, be better. I told you to be better last weekend. You didn't listen. Here it is again. Be better at your job.
And do you know who agrees with us? Is Zoe over at Fan Behaviour. So, as much as we are Australian and we obviously biased, could you tell? If you hadn't said that already. Mid-race, I get a message from one of my favourite Americans saying, I hate it here. This is Aussie discrimination. I'm just saying it. It's so cruel. I want to go home. I was like, what have we done to you? All we do is give you fast and funny people and you give us slow red flags. It is absolutely unacceptable. And Daniel Ricciardo actually made an interesting point, which was that, he's like, imagine if more cars had been affected in that incident and you had 7, 8, 10 cars that were a lap down. Are you going to restart the race after a red flag with 10 cars that are a lap down? So if this is a rule that could so quickly be, adjusted or no longer be logical, just based on how many cars are involved or something. I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense. There's no point. And I really do feel for everyone in the team. And we heard that on Ricciardo's radio afterwards. There was so much back and forth between him and the engineers kind of saying like this is everyone's pissed off because they worked bloody hard to get that car ready again. He worked hard to show the pace that they've got and try and do it like it. But what do you do? So
there are options.
It was a really disappointing weekend, but it was also a promising weekend. It's one of those ones where you go, there's a lot there. They're not going to be challenging for, your top two, maybe a podium, actually, I think, if there were the right conditions and enough other retirements. But, and things happen.
Yeah.
But so it was a promising weekend, but a bloody frustrating one.
Look, there's opportunities for the race director to make that up. You have a safety car restart and just allow DR and Oscar to unlap themselves. It's a 70-second circuit, so it wouldn't take very long, and then let everyone race. I think everyone would rather that rather than a second standing start and having these two drivers have almost no ability to get points unless everyone else retired. Yes, that is biased. No, I don't care. But DR is back from the sprint all the way through the race. It was great to see his pace for everything. And look, I'm glad Yuki has been announced for next year too, alongside Daniel for this point. Obviously, Liam Lawson's going to come in when Checo's replaced by Daniel after Abu Dhabi. So we're only a couple of weeks of that away from that being announced, and my tinfoil hat is going to remain there. But it is good news.
One more thing I just wanted to say also, but to your point about Yuki. One of the most challenging things to do is when you are in that state of anger as an emotion and you're experiencing it, is to try and create space between what you're feeling and how you behave. And that's why, whilst the most patronising phrase you'll ever hear when people say take a deep breath or count to 10, what you're trying to do is create time between your amygdala, really angry little amygdala saying, fight him, and you going, maybe not today. And allowing your frontal cortex to do its executive functioning and not act on those very kind of, caveman-like emotions. The problem is that when you are going at 300 kilometers an hour and you are in racing conditions, that's very hard to do, which means you have to practice outside of those conditions. So you need to go and figure out what that strategy is going to be for you to try and create time between the feeling and the action. Practice it outside of that setting so that when you go into that environment, you go, I know what to do here. Or you get familiar with the feeling of like, oh no, it's in my throat. It's going to happen. I'm going to drive into them or drive off the track or do something silly. You recognize those feelings in your body before you actually allow them to take over your behavior. But like I said, the conditions and the environment that they're in, it's got to be one of the most challenging ones ever to try and put that into action. But it could be the difference between Yuki forever being this frustrated, angry, but with high potential driver and somebody who could, get podiums.
Yeah, and look, he probably left points on the table this weekend as a result of that frustration. I mean, he could easily have been 7th. And with this fight with Williams, that points gap is very close. That could have made all the difference. And also, listen, this is why I listen to the Lakeside Drive podcast for stuff like this. This is why Campy, also Freya, thinks you're a doctor, because that was absolutely brilliant. We're going to take a quick ad break. We'll be back very shortly. And we are back. Hopefully you've all consumed that brilliant dialogue from Freya. Thank you. That's genuinely insightful, and we don't get that enough. Maybe we need to, anyway, I don't know. That was just fantastic. I'm really stoked about it. Let's talk about Mercedes, shall we? George Russell, he qualified in 6th. Hamilton qualified in 5th. Hamilton finished in 8th. George didn't finish. Cooling was an issue amongst many cars this weekend, and Mercedes' pace just was not there. As you've written here, Toto Wolff has said worst weekend ever. He has a habit of saying that at least once a year, although it was the opposite of how they felt this time last year.
This is not where they thought they were going to be this weekend. It was so disappointing, but my favourite moment during this race for Mercedes was George Russell saying, so are we working together on this or are we just doing our own thing? And then 5 laps later saying, so are we doing our own thing? And it's like, we're still discussing it. I was like, how long are you going to discuss this for? But the reason why he asked that, I think, was because he could not hold on to Hamilton's pace. So he was like, my only potential way of scoring some good points here is if we work together, because I don't think I can do it on my own. So I think he was wanting to know if there was a bit more stretch in strategy to allow him to kind of work a bit more closely with Hamilton to try and pull them both up, rather than kind of get left behind, which is, ultimately I was going to say what happened, but not really. Obviously had to, didn't get left behind, didn't finish.
Yeah.
But yeah, cooling, couldn't get it under control.
It's interesting the more this season goes on, and I know we've spoken about this also recently on the podcast, but just how the divide between Hamilton and Russell is playing itself out. And I think someone also pointed out just the Williams era of George Russell versus the Williams era of Alex Albon, and just some differences there. I mean, you can't really be direct comparison because there's a lot more upgrades now in this Williams generation than there were when George Russell was there. But people are starting to make this noise about maybe George isn't the driver that everyone was kind of expecting him to be in terms of raw pace and whatnot, especially compared to Lewis Hamilton. But in the same breath to say, well, Hamilton's not dropped any kind of pace or want for this sport, and his 8th World Championship, even at his age, inverted commas, his age, although he's still young enough to be doing this stuff. Mercedes will be interesting. Again, I think they're probably going to now be focused more on next year, just understanding the upgrades of having these side pods and compared to the no pods, and understanding what that car can then do. Let's keep talking though, Freya, because I want to talk about Ferrari and the devastating weekend for Charles Leclerc, who didn't even make it to the starting grid, had some mechanical issues, rear tyres locked up, no hydraulic pressure. And for the first time this season, instead of blaming the car or somebody else, he gets on the radio and says, "Why do I have all of this bad luck?" Charles lamenting Charles for the first time on the radio. He qualified in P2, Sainz qualified in P8 and finished in 6th. Had some mechanical problems of his own. I think we were all kind of wondering whether a cooling issue would be for him too, Freya, but it's frustrating because Freddie Vasseur was very buoyant at the beginning of the Grand Prix, standing next to the Ferrari, talking to Martin Brundle in the grid walk. Just Charles just wants it to be over, doesn't he?
What do you say? And what he did say was this: I just want to forget this whole season. And it really was. I think you're completely right in saying his words this weekend. I mean, they're what we all have probably been feeling for a while. It's just that he finally felt like he could actually say it.
Yeah.
But it is exactly that. This whole season, he's like, I just want to forget it. And I think, much like some other teams who probably thought they would have a bit more success here, just came crashing down so quickly. And it reminded me of, James, the amount of times that we say things like, when will Hamilton start complaining about his tyres?
Yeah,
probably on the formation lap. Or when will the Ferrari blow up? Like, lap 1, it actually happened. We usually say it as a joke. So Ferrari, don't take us seriously.
Yeah, heartbreaking. I mean, they're going to want to look at next season already. And I mean, Charles had such a great first half of last season too, so he would be expecting something. I mean, Carlos Sainz, the only non-Red Bull driver to win this year, so there is some joy for Ferrari, but not a lot. Okay, let's talk about Aston Martin. Fernando Alonso, just God in every single way. Let's get this out of the way first, though. There is absolutely no truth about any rumours to do with Fernando Alonso to Red Bull Racing. Please stop clicking any kind of clickbait headlines around that. There are some very substandard, subpar, average journalists, inverted commas, around the world talking about Formula One. And you clicking on their stories isn't helping because they get ad revenue and a whole bunch of other stuff from it. Fernando is exceptionally happy in Aston Martin. He'll know more about what's going on in that team than anyone, of course, and whether or not Lance and Lawrence Stroll will remain there or if they're indeed selling off shares and moving themselves along. But there is clearly pace in this car again, Freya. We've seen that the last couple of rounds that really dropped off. They brought some upgrades. Didn't fully understand it, had some hybrid up of the former version of the car and the new version of the car, finally figured it out. And Aston Martin even said for the Mexican Grand Prix and for the United States Grand Prix that it's almost an open test session. We're just putting the cars out there to figure it out and see what goes on. And they're finally able to bring some pace back. Whilst I don't believe Lance Stroll's pace of third in qualifying was real, it was good at least for him to hopefully give him a bit of a boost and remind him that he's a Formula One driver. Fernando Alonso qualified in 4th. He ended up finishing 3rd, which was just the best racing. If only we saw all of it in the last couple of laps. And Stroll finished in 5th. So for Aston Martin, actually getting points on the board again, thank goodness for that. Lance really needs to work on his start, but that's okay. There's things to be spoken about here, Freya, in a positive way for Aston Martin, finally, after all of these months of woe.
It was really interesting, wasn't it, to hear them saying just how experimental the last 2 races have been. And I think Nando actually said going into this race he was really excited about it because it was the first one that he had done in quite some time where he felt just clear and confident in what they were doing and that they actually felt like they were there to race, the last two being so experimental. So sometimes you get that feeling from people going into the weekend that they're like, yeah, we're on here. Now, I don't think we can look too much into that, but in hindsight, with the PhD that I do have, Captain Hindsight over here, it is interesting when you then do, look to the Wednesdays and Thursdays and how people are talking about their potential and what they're doing. The most interesting thing I found, though, that, oh my goodness, that end to the race, it was just phenomenal. I was so excited to have some drama after what had been a quieter few laps on the track. It was just, there was roars while we were watching. Everyone was very excited. And Alonso said, he's like, I thought I had everything under control. And then all of a sudden, Checo just had this pace that we did not expect. And I thought it was done after the first overtake. And that just shows how much you have to, I think, kind of be able to, I suppose, switch where your head's at so quickly. Because if he thought it was done after the first overtake, but then to realise that it was back on and go back into that type of mode, that's incredible. It's definitely, though, the case that, second row, third and fourth, I think that's flattering to the pace that the car had. And they did benefit from the end of qualifying when Tommy T showed up. So, but good. It's good. I think like the more teams that we have fighting for podiums with less inevitable kind of feeling results, it's good for the sport.
Yeah, it's great for the sport. And it was really great to see post-race too, Sergio and Fernando getting around each other and enjoying that. And that's one of the things. These guys are all racers. They love good competition, fair competition. Sergio said, Fernando's going to try every single thing in the book, but he's going to do it fairly at Esteban Ocon. And so from that point of view, it was just so enthralling to watch. And for me, that's what saved the whole Grand Prix weekend was that battle. And just to see the lift for the team, 3 different teams on the podium. Checo did perform pretty well, but again, would Max Verstappen have been able to get past Fernando Alonso? Probably. He's able to get more extraction out of that car. So whilst it's great for Fernando, and whilst Sergio was probably happy he had that Grand Prix race time with Fernando, I doubt he would have been stoked about not getting that podium because we only have 2 more rounds to go. Let's talk about McLaren. Oscar Piastri, again, having that issue. It wasn't anything to do with him. He qualified 10th, just off the pace of Lando Norris, qualifying in 7th. He ended up finishing 14th. Norris, of course, having a pretty dominant drive in 2nd. There is a very clear distinction between someone who's been in this industry for many, many years and a rookie who hasn't come to this track before, another one of those tracks, and able to deliver. I mean, we're obviously biased from an Australian point of view, but this is promising talent. Oscar Piastri able to put stuff together, whilst he would have been absolutely frustrated about that result in terms of copping damage into turn 1. He still went around the racetrack without complaining. He was still able to gather great data for the final 2 rounds. McLaren, though, coming from worst to second best on the grid, Freya. Mercedes still scratching their heads as to how their customer team was able to jump them so dominantly in 2023, I reckon.
I'm sure they might go back to them and say, what have you learned about our engine that we don't know yet? But there's obviously been quite, I suppose, fundamental changes to that organisation as well. And I have to say that I didn't think that we would see such a step forward so quickly. I thought it might take them another at least kind of half a year-ish. I was hoping that going into next year we would really see them on where they are now. So it's fantastic. And look, Norris, for all we say about him, he has driven exceptionally well. It's absolutely true to say, he had that little battle with Max at the start, and we'll obviously talk about Red Bull next, but if anything, it just shows how great the Max in that car is to kind of go, that's the closest thing you've had to some rivalry for quite some time. And you just seem to find this, I don't know, if there's like a turbo button he just presses when he feels like he's under threat and he just finds another gear. It's incredible. But Norris has done really well. And Piastri said at the end of it, he said, look, it's another 70 laps around a track that I haven't driven before. Yeah. So it's data, it's learning, and under the conditions that we were in, that's kind of the mindset, I suppose, that you have to go into of how can I still benefit from being on the track at this point in time? If points is off the cards, then what else do I need from this? And it's to learn everything about this car and this track, which is obviously what he's done. Frustrating though to watch.
Yeah, and look, he is the kind of guy who is able to see the forest from the trees in that respect. And he'll be fully focused on next year. He loves going Grand Prix racing, and it's great to see him able to be so mature considering he's the youngest on the grid. Let's finish up with Red Bull Racing. Max Verstappen, dominant race weekend. Look, he is on a record-equaling amount of top step wins kind of in a row. Well, he's going to be again, I reckon, because it's going to be very hard for anyone to come back before Singapore next year. Landon Norris, by the way, has equaled Nick Heidfeld for the amount of podiums without a win. Good on you, Lando. And Sergio Perez, so qualified ninth. So that's not great for him. Fourth, obviously, in that fight, 53 thousandths away from being on the podium, which I think is just fantastic. Reminiscent of the Hamilton-Gasly finish we had a couple of years ago, where I think at that point Hamilton got disqualified for something or got a penalty post-race, and Carlos Sainz was promoted, and McLaren had to then all gather to get up to the podium, and they turned the Wi-Fi off so the social media people couldn't post. Anyway, whatever. It's just one of those things. But Red Bull Racing, obviously very dominant. Max just very clinical with it. Probably not as dominant as... Sorry, I say very dominant. They actually weren't, really. If I think about qualifying, they still weren't probably as quick over one-lap pace, but race car-wise, I mean, it's Max Verstappen, isn't it, Freya? So it's hard to do much against that.
Exactly. And I think, as I was saying earlier, it's just astonishing with him right when you think that maybe you've found a kind of, chink in the armour. It's he just somehow pulls it out. And it is quite amazing. But I just want to focus on that battle with Alonso. I know we've already talked about it. But James Hinchcliffe was talking about it afterwards with Laura Winter. And he was not short of praise for that racing because it was fantastic. Like you said, it was fair. And he said, look, there's not many drivers who can pull those types of manoeuvres. And they both said that as well. But he said, at the same time, he should not have been in that position. The qualifying component has just got to get better. Now, I can't recall exactly where he was and if we had another push lap to go when the rain came down in qualifying. So I'm not sure how much more he could have done there or not. I don't recall exactly where he was in terms of his qualifying strategy, but he needs to not be in the position of having to make his way through the field. Sure, we get to see his racecraft, which is great for spectators, but I think just when it comes to the position that he finds himself in the last 10 laps, still trying to push himself onto the podium, but still grateful for the racing that we got to see.
Yeah. All right, well, that's our team-by-team analysis done and dusted for another week. Let's talk about our driver for the day, who I assume is all the same driver because you've already written Fernando Alonso. So I am saying for Campy on his behalf, Fernando Alonso, and for myself, Fernando Alonso.
Yeah,
just
the god.
A masterclass in driving a car that wasn't as fast as the two cars in front of him and should have not have been as fast as the car behind him. Fantastic all around.
Fantasy, 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 fantasy.
All right, let's do our fantasy team name competition to wrap this one up. First was McLaren is out of the bin, 471 points, 3 times Verstappen, 2 times Norris. Alonso, Piastri and Ricciardo with Red Bull Racing and McLaren as your team. Very, very well done. Helps when you do a sprint race weekend as well, I imagine you get more points. Second was Hashley with 451 points, and third Super Speed 17, 409. Just a few names to round us out. Freya, Holy Skid Blocker Rooney, Kia Sorrento Racing Team. Hello, Tilly Willy. Rio Di Ricciardo, and 2 big Hossy boys. I was 9th, Campy's 36, so that's very exciting. And Freya still not part of this competition this year. Thank you so much for listening. Listener, if you want to support the show, there's a couple of ways that you can do that. Firstly, you can join our Patreon and get ad-free content Link is in the description, or just go to Patreon and search for Lakeside Drive. You can buy some merchandise. We've a couple of hats left still, which is cool. I also maybe designed a t-shirt over the weekend after a couple of beers.
So what have you done?
A couple of people have already ordered that, which is fantastic.
We're serious people, James.
No, we're not.
We're serious
Certainly,
people.
You can check that disaster out on the website as well. And if you haven't yet subscribed to us on YouTube or on Instagram, please do. Apparently, once you get above 1,000 on both of those platforms, things start happening in a better format. We're not going anywhere. We love doing what we're doing, and we are massively grateful to you for that. But Freya, thank you to you. We're not going to see you next weekend of our preview of the race, of which there are many tickets left still for sale for Las Vegas. What a surprise. Very expensive. It will be interesting to see if those drop in price in the next 14 days, because I tell you what, Freya, it would be a pretty poor look if Vegas didn't sell out, or at least didn't appear packed, wouldn't it?
If I wasn't so against this race, if they dropped those ticket prices massively, I might just go. But I'm sad not to be joining you next weekend because I have many things to say. So I might just drop you a few notes as to how my opinions start to form during the week. But do you know what? Williams is my call for next week. I reckon Vegas and Williams they're both gonna be in the points. It's gonna be great because it's gonna be cold, because it's in the desert and it's in the middle of the night. So many problems, but long straights, cold weather. I think that Williams is gonna be an absolute rocket ship.
Well, we'll see how that plays out. Join Campy and myself next week for a preview of the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Thank you so much for listening. See you later.